In Sudan, the army has tightened its hold over the capital, reclaiming control of Khartoum airport from paramilitary fighters. Soldiers with the Rapid Support Forces group had been stationed at Khartoum airport for 2 years after fighting first broke out between the RSF and Sudan's army. Seizing control of the airport is the latest in a series of battleground victories by Sudan's army. On Tuesday, an airstrike carried out by Sudan's army hit a market in Darfur, killing 270 people. That's according to aid groups. Both the Sudanese armed forces and RSF have repeatedly been accused of shelling civilian areas. The United Nations has expressed concern about the escalating attacks.
Gravely alarmed by the continued attacks on civilians across that country. Last night in Darfur, dozens of casualties were reported when airstrikes hit a market located about 40 kilometers northwest of El Fasher. Our humanitarian colleagues are also deeply concerned about escalating attacks on populated areas in Khartoum. In eastern Khartoum yesterday, there were reports of civilians killed and injured when artillery struck a mosque during evening prayers. Civilian casualties were also reported on Sunday as a result of heavy shelling in Omdurman, which is Khartoum's twin city across the Nile.
And with me in the studio now is Shayna Lewis, a Sudan specialist and human rights consultant. Shayna, can I ask you, the Sudanese army now seems to have control over Khartoum airport, and at least Friday the army managed to seize the presidential palace. What does this mean for the military position of the Sudanese army?
Thanks for having me, Garad. In the past few hours, we've actually seen reports that the Sudanese armed forces are claiming to have recaptured all of Khartoum. Now, this is the strongest military position that SAF have been in since the outbreak of war almost 2 years ago. And since the start of this year, they've been very successful in pushing the RSF out of many of the areas of central and eastern Khartoum, Sudan, including Jazeera state and the capital, which was Wad Medani, but also White Nile and now Khartoum. But unfortunately, I don't think we're approaching an end to the war, rather a new phase in violence in this conflict. Just overnight on Monday, SAF had launched incredibly intense airstrikes on a town in North Darfur by the name of Taura. And by some reports, they have killed upwards of 270 civilians. Yesterday, when I started my day, the death count was at 50 civilians, and by the end of my day, it had reached upwards of 270. And the footage coming out of North Darfur is some of the most egregious, disheartening footage I've seen in these 2 years of war. Footage of bodies that are petrified in place because of the intensity of the barrel bombs that SAF dropped on the civilian market. And unless there is a commitment to coming to the table and pursuing peace, we're going to see more atrocities across the country.
Now, when we're talking about SAF, we're talking about the Sudanese armed forces. I'd like to clarify that for viewers who haven't followed this conflict as closely. But what goals does SAF have, and what are the goals of the Rapid Support Forces?
Well, the problem is right now that both the Sudanese armed forces and the Rapid Support Forces are committed to securing an absolute military victory in Sudan. They both feel that they have more to win on the battlefield than at the negotiating table. And we haven't really seen a shift in that position over the past 2 years. So I think the goal of the Sudanese armed forces here is to eradicate the RSF from all areas of control in Sudan, and the RSF still believes that they can gain territory and actually improve their negotiating position so that they have a place in the future of Sudan.
Is there anything that the international community could do to incentivize either side to come to the negotiating table?
I think for the international community to actually make progress in Sudan, they really need to target the external backers who are fueling and profiting from this war.
Who are they?
And that includes the United Arab Emirates, who are funding the RSF, but it also includes, on the other side, the Egyptians, who are probably the biggest backers of the Sudanese armed forces at this point. And until we have a real tightening of the noose and actually sanctions on parties who are in violation of the Darfur arms embargo, we're not going to see any advancements towards peace. So that should be the focus.
I think we've seen serious human rights violations and unnecessary violence on both sides. Do you have any hope that we'll see anyone in command on either side on trial at some stage?
So in recent weeks, the Office of the Public Prosecutor in Sudan has actually launched mass criminal trials against alleged RSF collaborators. But the problem is the idea of there being any kind of fair or impartial trials in Sudan right now is highly dubious. And that is why we need the ongoing activities of the International Criminal Court, who are investigating the situation in Darfur, but also the UN fact-finding mission, who have a mandate to to investigate atrocities across the country. Those initiatives need to continue. But unfortunately, because of the global aid cuts that we've seen since the beginning of this year, the Sudanese documentation space has been, the legs have been cut off. So unless donors such as the German government, the French government, the Brits turn the tap back on to fund not only Sudanese documentation, but also the humanitarian response, in coming months and years, we're really going to struggle with the pursuit of justice and accountability in Sudan. And frankly, the turning on of those taps for aid is purely a political decision.
Mm-hmm. Talking about aid, the international humanitarian organizations, are they doing a good job in Sudan right now? And what do they need to do a better job?
They're really struggling with the response to the world's largest ever humanitarian crisis and the largest displacement crisis since World War II. In order to do their jobs, they need funding from the international donors. And until that, again, tap is turned back on, they're really going to struggle. And that means groups like the World Food Programme being forced to make decisions on who they provide life-saving assistance to. In practice, on the ground, that means the decision of who they feed and who they do not. And this is not only WFP, it's also the other UN agencies, and it's also international humanitarian organizations. So rather than kind of drawing attention to the shortcomings of their work, I would really point to the lack of resources that they've been provided by the international community. The UN humanitarian appeal for Sudan currently is 7% funded, less than 7% funded, and we're almost a quarter of the way through the year. So it's really the shame of the international community. We have the April the 15th ministerial conference that is taking place in London and is also being co-sponsored by the French and the Germans, I believe. And this is really a chance not only for international donors to step up, but also to show that the protection of civilians in Sudan is a priority. And we will not, as a global community, continue to allow the RSF and SAF to wage their war using the bodies of innocent civilians in Sudan.
Thank you very much. Shayna Lewis, their Sudan specialist and human rights consultant. Thanks
Thank you.